You're about to enjoy part 2 of the conversation with my father. If you watched part 1, you'll remember that he was involved in the government department in Russia whose job it was to attempt to rebuild the Soviet Union. Because of this, his perspective on Russian history, and particularly the conflict in Ukraine, I think will be very interesting to many of you. One quick thing to say before you dive in is that you can watch this interview or listen to it in the original Russian discussion if you like, or you can watch it in English, which is my translation that's been dubbed using AI, which is why it sounds a little bit weird. The only thing you have to do to select the language you want is click the gear icon on YouTube, go to audio track, and then select English or Russian. Enjoy. So, Dad, we finished the conversation about your story by talking about you being forced out due to a power struggle with the ministry whose job it was. I'm not sure how to say it, to try to recreate or preserve the Soviet Union. People can watch it back and see for themselves. Given the current geopolitical context, it would be very interesting to hear how someone with that worldview. And by the way, one thing I should say is that of the 3 interviews you and I are doing, this one will be the most difficult because this is a subject on which we have the most differences of opinion.
Yes, possibly.
Yes, possibly. We've discussed these issues many times, so I suspect that could be how it goes. Nonetheless, as with other people Francis and I interview, we try, first and foremost, to show how that person thinks and accurately reflect their worldview. That's how I'd like to conduct this conversation as well. So the first question is, how do people who view the collapse of the USSR the way you do see the current geopolitical situation and Russia's role in it?
Well, this is, to be honest, it's a difficult question.
Of course.
To me, political history, the history of states, isn't something particularly serious. We'll come back to this. But to explain my view of Russian history in this political sense is difficult. The thing is that I promised you to talk about the view I hold, which is partially based on the ideas of Arnold Toynbee, whose argument was that the unit of history is not a state or a nation, but a civilization. That's why we have to look at the nature of civilizations. Any civilization encompasses many countries, many nations, many ethnic groups, which collectively make up what we can actually study from a historical perspective. Russia inherited, or some might say, seized the leadership over its civilization from the Ottomans and went from being an ethnic group to an umbrella ethnic group. If we take Russian history, everything started with a few Eastern Slavic ethnic groups. First, they fought each other, but eventually managed to unite. Then came the Mongols, which ended monoethnicity. And that created this composite ethnic group.
Let's pause here quickly because I know that in the West, the Mongol invasion is like, so Genghis Khan showed up.
It was his grandson in Russia anyway.
Yes.
Genghis Khan invaded other places.
People don't know much beyond Genghis Khan. Can you tell us a bit about what the area we now call Russia looked like and what happened when the Mongols invaded?
I'll try to give a summary as we don't have the time to get fully into it. The Mongols, whom we call Tatar Mongols, they invaded, they sacked many cities. This country was known as the country of many cities. There were more than 2,000 cities in this area.
But it wasn't a single country at this point. They were duchies, right?
Well, it wasn't an empire. They were different duchies, but they were all related to each other by blood. They had strong familial ties. Remember, this is before countries existed. Land was private property. This is my land, this is your land, and we're brothers.
Yeah, but they fought each other.
Brothers fight, it's pretty normal.
Sure, sure.
After the Mongol invasion, the area we now call Russia received an influx of people with different cultural and ethnic principles. And if you look at Russia today, the descendants of Mongols and the descendants of Slavs are now one people. They are different ethnicities. For example, Tatarstan in Russia, which is considered the land of the Tatar people. And the Tatars are the descendants of Genghis Khan's warriors. Today they are part of the people of Russia in the same way as Russians and other ethnic groups, not only Slavs. The point is, you're either an ethnic group or an umbrella ethnic group. Each civilization can only have one umbrella ethnic group. There was a period in history when the umbrella ethnic group in our civilization were the Ottomans. And then they were replaced and became an ethnic group. Turks, Russians became the umbrella ethnic group. What's an umbrella ethnic group? It's when you can be Jewish and Russian, Armenian and Russian, Tatar and Russian. It used to be possible to be from a different group and an Ottoman. But that changed. Now you're either a Turk or you're not, and then you might be killed.
So an umbrella ethnic group is an imperial identity, we might say?
Yes, you could say that. It's the central ethnic group of a civilization, which isn't based on ethnicity, but is a single polyethnic group. You can retain some properties of your particular ethnicity while also being part of the umbrella ethnic group.
So in the British Empire, it would be the British.
I think in today's Western civilization, the umbrella ethnic group is Americans. And it's a big question. For example, what threatens the Russian umbrella ethnic group today? Nationalism. If Russian nationalism boils over, the Russian umbrella ethnic group will go from being an umbrella group to just an ethnic group in the same way the Ottomans became Turks. Then Russians will cease to be the central ethnic group of their civilization. The same is true of Americans. You know better than I to what extent this umbrella identity works in America. I suspect that it's starting to break down.
As you know, I'm very concerned that in both Britain and America, the idea that our skin color and ethnicity is not important. The idea that we are all British or we're all Americans and we are united by this identity. And that means we have the same goals and objectives. Yes, you're right. That idea is being eroded. And of course, anyone who understands anything can see that this leads to strife and conflict.
After the 1990s, nationalism of various kinds began to increase rapidly across the former Soviet Union, including in Russia. In recent years, it has been suppressed pretty strongly. I assume it's being done to stay at the center of that civilization.
So, in your view, Russia is currently fighting to preserve this imperial identity, and that's why it's suppressing nationalism of every kind?
Yes. Personally, I do not tolerate nationalism. Russian, Jewish, Armenian, American, British. There is nationalism in Britain too, because you have the English, but you also have the Scots, the Irish.
The Welsh.
Of course, in Russian it's Weltsi.
Oh, really?
Yes, Weltsi, yes. Well, maybe you said it right. Anyway, it's a bit of a problem. In Russia, unlike Britain, where you have 4 ethnic groups, there are around 200 ethnic groups. And something like 1,000 different languages. No? An ethnic group is a large tribe, but you also get small tribes. And they also have their own languages, cultures, its own small region.
Okay. So I keep interrupting because this is fascinating. Let's come back to close the loops I keep opening. So the Mongols came and conquered this territory, right?
They vassalized it. The Mongols had an interesting approach, which we don't have time to get into.
They killed the people they needed to kill and subjugated everyone else.
They killed who they had to. They killed everyone who resisted. They subjugated everyone else. But for example, when it came to priests, irrespective of the religion, they were considered important, valuable, and exempt from taxes and violence, because anyone who served gods was important in this Mongol nation. They were trying to become a civilization. They failed and dissolved. So now if we return to Toynbee, we can see that the Mongols came from the empty space between two civilizations, and according to Toynbee, this is normal. When empty spaces begin to experience the impact of a neighboring civilization, they eventually produce warrior tribes that invade neighboring civilizations. In the end, the Mongol invasion didn't produce a new civilization. They dissolved in the civilizations they conquered.
And how did this period affect the way we see Russia now in terms of what it has become?
First, it expanded significantly to the east and eventually seized all the land held by the Mongols and accepted them into itself. Mongols as invaders from outside civilizations conquered our civilization, but not only. They also conquered the Chinese civilization, and Genghis Khan's descendants became Chinese emperors. That didn't happen in Russia. They didn't become Russian emperors. After a while, they entered the service of Russian dukes and sometimes converted to Orthodox Christianity, sometimes not, depending on the demands placed on them. Eventually, they merged into what is now Russia, and today they're part of it. Obviously, today there are still minor differences between the Russian ethnic group and the Tatar ethnic group, but they're not as big as they were 500 years ago. But at the level of the umbrella ethnic group, it's a single entity. So the only area where there are serious issues is Yakutia, and it's not because the Yakuts are the descendants of Mongols, it's because Yakuts are Turkic people who came to that area from Central Asia, and with them it hasn't been fully... the relationship is still good, and many Yakuts are Russian.
We don't have the time to get into the Turkic people, so let's come back to the subjects I raised. So, the objective of a person who looks at all this from the perspective of preserving the civilization is
once civilizations conquered all the empty spaces between them, they became neighbors and continued to push on each other's boundaries. If we think about Russia's more recent history, on the west side we have a border with Western civilization. That is the border between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. Today, the center of Western civilization is the US. There was a time when that wasn't the case. There were other centers. Napoleon was one. Hitler tried to be one. England was once the center, albeit fairly remote. We're the center, but from our island...
There's that famous joke. There's a fog over the English Channel, which means the continent is isolated.
Exactly. Today, Anglo-Saxons in America are the umbrella ethnic group. So Western civilization has tried to take land from Russia.
What period are you talking about exactly?
I'm talking about a period, let's say the last 500 years, right?
We'll get back to my dad in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about something I personally use: ground news. In an era where facts are so often filtered through partisan lenses, it's more important than ever to know the full story behind the headlines. That's why I trust Ground News, a platform that cuts through media bias to give you a comprehensive view of what's really happening. With Ground News, you can compare coverage from over 50,000 sources and assess each one's political bias. One of their standout features is the blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either the left or the right. Let's look at a couple of stories. Follow along at ground.news/trigonometry. Look at this story that is being covered almost entirely by outlets on the left. How Trump could declare a national emergency to hit Canada with 25% tariffs. You can see why the left will want to amplify that kind of story. But here's a story the right's really focusing on. Study finds TikTok suppresses anti-China content influences opinions. On the news story page, you'll get a grasp of where the gaps in reporting lie. You'll see a bias breakdown, how reliable each source is, and learn how all the sources are funded. It's essential for anyone who's serious about staying informed. Right now, TRIGGERnometry viewers who subscribe through our link can get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan, the same plan that we use. Just click the link in the description or scan the QR code and subscribe at ground.news/trigonometry. This is the perfect way to support transparency in the media while keeping yourself informed. Your subscription helps Ground News bring transparency back to the media, something that I fully support. So, over the last 500 years, civilizations which are now on each other's borders have been fighting for land.
So, for example, Poles as an ethnic group and as a nation, from the beginning, from medieval times, have been part of Western civilization, even though they're Slavs.
Because they are Catholics, right?
No, they're Catholics because they became part of Western civilization.
Okay.
Not the other way around. The Czechs are another example. The border between the Czech Republic and Slovakia is the border between civilizations. Slovaks are Eastern Christians, Czechs are Western Christians. And so various invasions have happened to move that border west or east. Poland was once part of the Russian Empire, then it tried to conquer Moscow. That's how it happened over and over. This happens between all civilizations that have a border with each other. They all fight all their neighbors. Sometimes they win territory, sometimes they lose it, sometimes they take it back again. Poland after World War II was part of the territory won by our civilization. It became part of the socialist camp, along with the Czechs. Now it went back to the West. Now the attempt is being made to make Ukraine part of Western civilization, even though Ukraine is part of Eastern civilization. It's possible. I mean, in the past, there was a relatively successful attempt to make a third of Germany part of Eastern Christian civilization. There's still a huge difference between East Germany and West Germany.
Well, from a Western perspective, that is East Germany trying to recover.
From a Western perspective, Russia tried to become part of the American world.
Huh? When?
In the 1990s, that's how they saw it. Because the Russians have accepted their fate and are now trying to become like us. Of course, they're weaker and not as good, but they're trying to become like us. Now, in reality, that wasn't what was happening. Each civilization has certain dreams that become beliefs.
What Francis Fukuyama called the end of history, when we all become liberal Democrats.
This is just nonsense.
That's clear to pretty much everyone at this point.
I don't know. It was clear to me from the get-go. I know it sounds boastful, but I laughed at it at the time. He's an example of someone who can't see anything outside his own civilization. All he sees is his dreams, which he confuses with the truth because he never looks outside.
So let me make a few claims on your behalf, and you tell me what's wrong with what I'm saying. So, the 1990s was a period when Eastern Christian civilization, led by Russia in whatever form, was weakened. It started to lose territory and lose influence, and its main competitor, Western civilization, began to press and exploit this weakness. Is that a fair summary?
One correction. You said competitor, singular, that's incorrect. There are 6 civilizations in existence today, if we believe Toynbee. It's not that I believe him exactly. I've thought about what he said and concluded he's correct. Anyway, all of the 6 civilizations are competitors to each other. Today we are friendly with China. There was a period when we were brothers, then we were enemies, now we are brothers again. It's perfectly possible we'll be enemies again in the future and then brothers again. This is normal. The Chinese civilization is our neighbor, so is the Indian civilization, so is the Persian civilization, now Iran. We don't have a direct border, although if you include all of our civilization, we do have a border with the Arabic civilization. The second Islamic civilization alongside the Persian civilization. And we have a border with Western civilization. So we have a border with all existing civilizations. For example, the Indian civilization has a border with the Chinese civilization, with ours, and with the Persian civilization, but not with the Arabic or with Western civilization. We are in competition with all our neighbors. According to Toynbee, there is a sort of emanation. Our cultural and economic particularities make their way over the border and have their impact. In the past, they impacted the people who lived in the empty spaces between civilizations, but for the last 100 years, they've impacted other civilizations. For example, liberals in Russia are what? It's penetration by the emanation of Western ideas.
Yeah, Russia doesn't have homegrown liberalism.
What about leftists and socialists in the West? That is penetration by our culture.
Yeah, everyone who reads my work knows that.
Good.
This part anyway.
So, in my view, we should not see the world as a battle between Eastern Christian and Western Christian post-Roman civilizations. There aren't just two civilizations, there are six. Each civilization has its own complex relationships with all the others, and they're all competing with each other. Civilizations can enter temporary partnerships, but never in human history have they merged. That will probably never happen. A civilization can die, but it can't become part of another. It's never happened. One of the many oldest civilizations is the ancient Egyptian civilization. It died out, it's extinct. All three Mesoamerican civilizations are extinct. Civilizations go extinct due to attack by another civilization. Mesoamerican civilizations died due to attack by Western civilization. The Egyptian civilization was destroyed by the Roman civilization, maybe an even more ancient one that descends from Alexander the Great. Egypt is still there, but there was a Greco-Roman Egypt and now it's Muslim. The point is, Egypt is still there, but the Egyptian civilization is gone. And it didn't merge with another, it just disappeared. Theoretically, some civilizations that exist today could go extinct too. And the job of anyone who cares about his civilization is to prevent it from getting so weak that it goes extinct. That requires being in a state of tension with all other civilizations. That's normal.
So, coming back to the 1990s, as we discussed when talking about your own story, you were forced to leave Russia under Yeltsin before Vladimir Putin came to power.
Yes,
Am I right in thinking that his coming to power marked a transition to the approach you've just described?
Well, it's not something anyone could have predicted beforehand because he was appointed by Yeltsin as a loyal assistant, and one might have assumed that he would continue Yeltsin's policies. But no, it turned out that on coming to power, he discharged his obligations to Yeltsin. He protected him and his family from everything, but he radically changed the country's policies. He strengthened his civilization again and began to resist. Instead of accepting everything as it was under Yeltsin, you know, everything's shit, but we'll drink some vodka and things will get easier. Putin started doing things that I like because I didn't succeed, but he has. During the 1990s, we were trying to do things he then actually did do.
Trying to recover what you had before.
At least partially to prevent our civilization from declining further, getting smaller and weaker. The situation is still difficult, but not as terrible as it was under Yeltsin. You know, if I looked at all of this at the level of countries and nations, then it would look different. But I look at these things at the level of civilizations.
So, at the level of civilizations, the things happening now, in your view, and I guess in the view of the people in charge of Russia today, represent an attempt to defend the interests of your civilization against an attempt to split off part of it.
Not to split off, but to take. This happens all the time. Sometimes you take, sometimes they take, sometimes you take it back and take more. People trying to do this is to be expected, but not accepted. Everything is fine, let them take this and that. No, it's not fine. We have to try to recover. It's like this.
Yeah, I understand. It's an ongoing competition. So how does this model account for the idea of self-determination which emerged in the 20th century, as I understand it?
What is that?
The idea is that, say, the Scottish people have a right to a country of their own. And if they want to leave the British civilization, they have the right to do that.
I can tell you straight away. If you want collapse, then you must give all your support to this, even on a geographical basis, where every 20 kilometers have the right to split off if they want to, because it benefits me. In my view, this idea in Europe was encouraged by the USA because it's to their benefit. It deprived the rest of the relatively influential Western civilization of the opportunity to become the center. If the Scots or the Irish or the Welsh can leave, then I, the American, can ensure I am the center of our civilization, and the rest of you are weak losers who answer to me. Whereas if you're strong and united, you can compete with me. You see, there are inter-civilizational, INTER, struggles, and intra-civilizational, INTRA, struggles, and they are different.
What I'm hinting at is that there is another side of the coin. We're talking about preserving a civilization, but the other side is the idea that peoples have a right to self-determination.
I don't see the history of humanity as the histories of individual ethnic groups. People is a difficult concept. An ethnic group is cleaner word. What is a people? Yesterday, you were part of this country, so you were part of these people. Today you are part of another country, and now you are part of a different people. That's the logic.
Look, in the early 90s, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians decided they didn't want to be part of Russian civilization. They split off and joined the Western civilization. They did this of their own accord.
They were very secondary in this process. The main driver of the collapse was what happened with Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine.
Okay, I understand. As you can imagine, we're heading towards Ukraine in the conversation. I'm just saying there have been peoples, countries, ethnic groups, call them what you want, who said the USSR has collapsed, we now have the freedom to choose, and we've decided to use it to no longer be part of this civilization. That's what self-determination means.
I won't argue with this. All I can say is that any border area of any civilization is impacted by the influence of the other civilization. This has happened many times. The Baltic states, Poland, Ukraine, and part of Belarus are part of the border area between two post-Roman civilizations. They are under constant influence. One civilization holds them, but after some time they begin to resist because of the emanations from the civilization they are currently not part of. That's how it always goes.
So, logically, if in the 1990s Russia had been stronger, it wouldn't have let them go?
More likely, they wouldn't have wanted to leave. During Soviet times, the Baltic states and also the Caucasus lived much better than the rest. They were wealthy and prosperous, at least more wealthy and more prosperous than the rest of the civilization. There was investment, the amount of industry and business that there was in the Baltic states during Soviet times was unparalleled, both before and probably in the future too. The same here in Armenia. Armenia was home to a massive chemical industry, huge mechanical plants, including military related. Why? Because the idea was to balance things out. The moment Armenia left the USSR, all these industries died instantly because they were kept alive by the economic policies of the Soviet Union.
So let's come back to the Eastern versus Western civilizations conversation. The conflict in Ukraine, in the conception you laid out, is pushback against the West's attempt to take land that has for centuries been under.
Yes, it's the attempt to recover land that has already almost been taken by Western civilization.
I imagine that the difficult thing here for many people is having to accept that, put simply, Ukrainians don't get a say. Don't they have a right to choose for themselves which civilization to align themselves with?
I told you I'm not interested in this level of discussion. I'm not interested in political conversation. I'm interested in questions of history. At a political level, we can criticize everyone else and everyone can criticize us. That's normal. This is the impact on the psychology of people that civilizations have. That's my view. You say they don't get a say. When they were asked in the 90s, they wanted to preserve the USSR. When Ukrainians are asked now, they say they want something else. It's clear to me that if Russia's successful in its current efforts, 10 years from now, Ukrainians will want to preserve the way things are then. This is a normal process, and I'm not even talking about Ukrainians. This applies to all people. I am not interested in these local specific conversations.
Let's come back to the civilizational level then. Does a civilization have natural boundaries?
Well, all civilizations started in small areas and gradually expanded until they came up against other civilizations. So you can't really say this land belongs to this civilization. Take history, the history of our two civilizations. It's very simple. Let's start 5,000 years ago. It's funny, but let's do it. Let's start with Sumerians, the Mesopotamian civilization. Some of them sailed to Crete and created the Crete and then the Mycenaean civilization, which led to ancient Greece. The successors to that civilization were the Romans. The Roman Empire split into two, Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Byzantine Empire, two Roman empires. The West is descended from the Western Roman Empire and Germanic barbarians who came to that area. We are descended from the Byzantines and the Turkic people who came to what is now Turkey and the then Russian duchies. That's why we're different. We are descended from one major Roman Empire, but from two separate halves of it and with different influences. So the West is descended from Germanic barbarians from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, whereas we are descended from Asian barbarians, in addition to the Roman Empire. That's why we're different.
Barbarians is not politically correct anymore. Alternative civilization is probably...
No, they were barbarians.
I'm only joking.
They were people outside civilization.
It was a joke.
Barbarian is a Greek word which meant people who did not speak Greek. People who sound like bar. When we say barbarians, we mean they were not part of a civilization.
I understand. So coming back to the idea of natural borders, in your conception, civilizations compete and there is no place where they'll arrive and say, we got here and we'll stop here.
That's exactly what they say. They just don't actually stop. Then someone comes and takes that place from them, then they take it back. It's what I showed you before.
Constant struggle.
Constant struggle. Yes. What's more, today we have a big conflict with the West, and the Chinese civilization is very carefully supporting us because it is also currently in competition with the West. The 5 Eurasian civilizations are gradually entering a temporary alliance to oppose the West.
That's the Chinese civilization.
The Indian civilization.
The Indians are staying neutral for the moment.
They're gradually moving.
They're hardly going to join forces with the Chinese.
They'll go join forces with Russia, but they'll tolerate the Chinese and the Chinese will tolerate them. That's another inter-civilizational conflict, India versus China. Then there's the Iranian, Persian civilization, and the Arab civilization.
At the moment, the interesting question is, how does Israel fit into all of this? Is Israel an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East?
Just like France or Japan, these are Eurasian borders conquered by Western civilization. Israel is the same. It could have been different, but Israel decided it wanted to be with America.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, we know that Stalin made a similar contribution to the creation of the State of Israel and its freedom to the one made by America. But eventually Israel decided to distance itself from Stalin. They had the right to do that. I'm not against it, I'm just saying that's what happened. Stalin sent lots of capable Jews from the USSR to Israel. He didn't expel them, he sent them to become Israelis and to build Israel. And they went and made their contribution.
Is that why Russia supports Syria, I mean Assad, at the moment?
It's why Russia isn't at war with Israel, even though it has reasons for that. But it's not happening because we know it's kind of ours. A third of the population are our people. They're Israelis now, of course, but they're our people. They came to Israel from our civilization.
Okay, then, so let's...
And by the way, at some point, Israel could become part of our civilization. Because historically, that area was part of the Byzantine Empire.
We recently reached a huge YouTube milestone with 1 million subscribers. Amid the celebrations, however, there have been a few cynical voices too.
Some people are asking, how did two guys with weird hair and no obvious talent manage to create some of the most sensible, balanced, non-partisan conversations on the internet? How do they attract massive guests? Some people have even gone as far as to ask, who funds you?
And the time has come to confess the truth. For the last 6 years, we've only been able to produce the show because of financial support from some nefarious, problematic people of highly questionable moral integrity.
You. Many thousands of you. That's why the show no longer looks like a Beatles tribute act doing a seance.
Now it looks like this, and this.
The guests keep getting bigger, the conversations keep getting better.
And this is just the beginning. We're excited to announce that we will be moving our locals community, including all bonus content, to our new home at Substack.
If you're already a supporter, your subscription will be moved over automatically.
As for the rest of you, this is your chance to step up and join us as we go to the next level.
Give me money!
Chill out, mate. We need a bit of finesse here. What he's trying to say is that the show will only keep getting bigger and better with your help.
You already know about the bonus content we have for supporters. For just $7 a month or $70 a year, you get ad-free extended interviews with a chance to ask our incredible guests your questions. But with Substack, you're going to get a lot more. Insightful articles on upcoming guests, a weekly newsletter, the ability to chat with each other on the app, both privately and in threads. You'll also be able to connect your podcast listening app like Spotify or Apple Music and enjoy the extended ad-free interviews on the go.
Your support will mean that we will be able to do more incredible US and other overseas trips with bigger and better guests. That means more phenomenal extra content for you as we get the best minds in the world to talk about the issues that truly matter. No bullshit, no fudging, just an honest conversation with a fascinating person.
Plus, I'll be able to afford a proper haircut.
You're not going to get one, but at least you'll be able to afford one.
Good point. Click the link and join 40,000 people like you to make the show you love better again.
How do you see the future of civilizational development and competition around the world?
The same way, what can change? Nothing.
But the balance of power can change.
If that happens, one of the civilizations could disappear like the ancient Egyptians. But I don't see it. Even the Persian civilization, which is relatively weak compared to the others, has survived and will survive. I think it will stay at 6. One theory I have is that Western civilization, and to be clear, these are just my personal thoughts based, of course, on certain information I've looked at, but still this isn't some kind of official forecast. Western civilization might split into 2, a northwestern branch and a southwestern branch. Because there's a huge difference between the Anglo-Saxon part and the Franco-Hispanic part. I believe that the split could happen along the border between North and South America, or more accurately, North and Central America, and the other split line will be in Europe. So Western civilization will split in 2, just like there was a period when we were like brothers with the West, when we still remembered we are descended from the Romans. This was during the first few centuries of the Russian duchies. They were like brothers with Europe, but then this ended. So the most immediate forecast is that within around 150 years, Western civilization could split into 2.
What would be the cause of this?
Very serious differences between 2 effectively umbrella ethnic groups, one being northern and one being southern. But the cause is that Western civilization took over Mesoamerican civilizations, and they're going to wake up. But it won't be the Mayans. It will be the birth of a new civilization.
What do you think about the idea of Neo-eurasianism? Alexander Dugin is one of the leading ideologues behind it. People don't know much about it, especially in the West, because no one reads him.
It's not an easy read.
So I've read his work, and summarizing his idea as simply as possible, he says Russia can't survive without having control over Eurasia. It has to split Western Europe off from America. It has to control, and not necessarily by military force, it could be alliances or just strong influence, but it has to control all of Eurasia. It has to secure an alliance with China, an alliance with the Persian civilization in the south, which Russia already has. And also it has to control Western Europe to secure what the US has, which is complete control over its continent.
This is related to another interesting idea, which says civilizations can be maritime or land-based. If that's true, there are 5 land-based civilizations in the world and 1 maritime. And a maritime civilization is basically pirates. They invade, raid, and leave. Then they wait 30 years, come back, invade, raid, and leave again.
Not necessarily. Dugin describes this also. A maritime civilization is commercial in nature. They trade.
When they're not strong enough to raid, They trade. When they are strong enough, they raid. But this is a different idea, and one I am not that keen on.
Why not? What are the flaws in your opinion?
My sense is that it's very heavily influenced by our civilization's outlook. It's like that American guy you mentioned who declared the end of history.
Fukuyama.
Yes, that was his inward-based view. He didn't look outside. My sense is that the people who came up with this idea are also not getting a good look outside. I can't prove that, obviously.
Well, we know that Stalin had that ambition. He said Soviet soldiers should one day wash their boots in the English Channel. So the idea of conquering Europe or splitting it off from Anglo-Saxon influence is not unique to Eurasianists.
I would say this is your English view, because our civilization, if we're talking about Eurasia, wants to include England as well. America, no, that's another continent, but England is an island part of our continent. So if we decide to pursue the Eurasianist model, be prepared that England will become part of our world.
All right. I'm not sure English people would be interested in that, as I am not.
For now, no, but over time they'll get used to it. If England was conquered and civilized, they'd get used to it. It's not like they'd be prevented from being English.
You're joking. But the reason we're discussing this is that as a result of the war in Ukraine, in the West, there are different interpretations, including at the civilizational level. Some people like me say this is an intercivilizational battle, and if the West wants to remain the West, it has to stand up for its interests. And there are people who say, no, us Westerners are bad people. We provoked poor Eastern civilization into defending itself, and they have no desire to go any further.
Both are right. This is a normal civilizational process. That's how it always is. So we could talk about the war in Syria. It could have been an intra-civilizational war if it were between Russia and Turkey in Syria, but it has become inter-civilizational because it's now a conflict between Russia and America in Syria. Syria is part of the Byzantine world. That's why Russia is active there.
Here's what I'm getting at. I don't think both can be right at the same time, because the people who say Russia was provoked say, if we leave them alone, everything will be just great. Everything will stay as it is.
This is all very silly. Of course, civilizations interact in this way.
In that case, the people who say, we must defend the West's interests, are right.
So, are those who say we must defend the East's interests?
Sure. But pretending Russia has no interest in going further is wrong.
At the moment, Russia has no specific plans to conquer, say, France.
But it has a civilizational interest.
Civilizations always have a civilizational interest. Just like Western civilization has an interest in conquering what it can.
Sure. So under this view, if the West succeeded in splitting Ukraine off, then they would split off Georgia, for example.
No, they'd split off Belarus, then the Caucasus, then Central Asia. That's how they think. But representatives of our civilization are thinking that we must recover at least what we had in 1946.
Exactly.
Poland, East Germany, Czech Republic.
Well, Putin says exactly that. He said, the Americans are undermining the post-World War II order.
In that, he's right.
I am not disputing that.
That's true.
After World War II, Eastern civilization controlled all of Eastern Europe.
Yes.
They collapsed the USSR and poor Russia lost all that land.
I think Poland should be left alone. Let it stay part of the West. Same with the Czech Republic. As for the rest, that's disputed territory between civilizations.
Is there
Not just territory, but also people.
Is there a way to prevent warring between civilizations which border each other?
Well, civilizations don't war, they compete. But sometimes the competition between certain civilizations intensifies to the point where they become temporary military enemies.
Is there a way to prevent this?
Yes, it gradually reduces. What do you mean prevent? There's no button you can press, no?
There was an idea, I've said this publicly a few times, that when I was at uni studying politics, among other things, there was this fact that no countries which had a McDonald's had gone to war. It sounds stupid, but the point was that if countries, civilizations, nations have such extensive trade relations, so for that reason, going to war is so against their interest, they'll not do it and negotiate instead. Can that work? Or ultimately, no matter how much junk China sells to the US, they'll eventually fall out over Taiwan.
They won't fall out over Taiwan. Taiwan is like Ukraine, though even if that particular issue is resolved, somehow the inter-civilizational contact and struggle will remain. We need to increase the size of the planet by a factor of 10 so we have empty spaces between civilizations again. But I haven't worked out how to do that yet.
Or we have to go to Mars, as Elon Musk says.
I don't agree with him. There's not much to do on Mars. I wouldn't want to live there, and I doubt Elon would either.
We'll see. So the issue that would or should concern any reasonable person in any civilization, in my view, is that the more we advance technologically, the greater the risks the battle of civilizations produces. If we look at history, both intra-civilizational and inter-civilizational conflicts, take the example of World War I. In English, it was called the War to End All Wars. That's how terrible it was. And then very soon afterwards, we had another war which was much worse again.
Approximately 10 times worse.
Yes, in terms of loss of life, but also destruction of everything, cultural and historical achievements of many different countries and civilizations. That was World War II. Today, humanity holds such destructive weapons in its hands that an inter-civilizational conflict on the border between two civilizations, which appears to most people as largely irrelevant to their lives, in the sense that a piece of land in Eastern Europe, I don't know why Indians should care about it particularly, or people in Latin America, or even in America itself. There are many people who say, why are we risking nuclear war for this? It's obvious that humanity as a whole has to think about this and try to control this risk. How can we stop nuclear annihilation of humanity?
One of the concepts that sits underneath what you're saying is the idea of globalization. You know, the idea that to prevent nuclear war, we need the world to become one thing, and that is impossible.
Without a nuclear war?
Yeah, you can't do it without a nuclear war. And even in the event of a nuclear war, it wouldn't become one thing. It's just that all civilizations except one could end up dead.
Or all of them could?
Yeah, it would probably be all of them. If we're talking about loss and sacrifice, and of course it's very sad, but if we cast our minds back to the plague epidemic during the late medieval period, way more people died than during World War II.
Especially as a percentage of the population.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yes, but I think most people would say, well, the plague is the plague, but war.
Wars are also like the plague. And the 1990s in Russia, I don't know if you know this, but the decline in the population as a result of our civilization being defeated, let's say, in this non-kinetic war were comparable to World War II.
Yes, we discussed this in the interview about your life story.
It's sad, but it's not the end of the world, whereas nuclear war could be the end of the world. As people thought about World War I, you know, we have this new terrible weapon called machine guns, but I think nuclear weapons are a lot worse than machine guns.
So do I. I think that's a justified view. That's why I don't view it as a larger risk in the same category. It's a different category of risk, the annihilation of all humanity. That's why I think reasonable people should think about how to prevent it. At this stage, the best thing we've come up with is the idea of mutual nuclear deterrence. What can you say about that?
I can say there are downsides. If the 6 great civilizations were the only ones with nuclear weapons, that would be a solid foundation, but that isn't the case. The fact that Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons is bad. The fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, and maybe Iran too.
It seems Iran doesn't have any so far, and efforts are being made to prevent it from getting any.
Maybe, maybe not, just like Israel having nuclear weapons is supposedly a secret.
It's an open secret. Israel's official policy is, we don't have nuclear weapons, but if the existence of Israel is under threat, we'll use them.
That's funny.
Yes, well, as far as I understand it, to possess nuclear weapons requires industrial facilities of a scale that could be seen from space. So we know Iran doesn't have nukes yet.
But they have everything needed to produce them.
But they don't have nukes as far as we know.
The thing you can't see from space is the existence or otherwise of nukes. You can only see the industrial facilities which they have, but maybe not the nukes themselves.
So your point is that it's bad that nuclear weapons...
That a lot of different people have nuclear weapons. Also, we obviously had the infamous Cuban Missile Crisis, where after the US placed nuclear weapons in Turkey, the USSR placed nuclear weapons in Cuba. In the end, nuclear war was averted with the US removing nuclear weapons from Turkey and the USSR removing nukes from Cuba. I think nuclear weapons could easily appear on Cuba in the current situation. What's more, it doesn't even matter now because we have these terrible things underwater.
Nuclear torpedoes.
Extremely powerful nuclear torpedoes, and all great nations have nuclear submarines near their enemies' coasts. So this idea of removing nukes doesn't work anymore. It's like a game. You can make sure there are no nukes in Cuba, but that doesn't make you less vulnerable. This is something we have to live with.
How? How can humanity try to resolve this problem? How can we reduce these risks as much as possible?
It's always the same. If one civilization goes mad, a nuclear war could happen. I don't think we're there. The US understands it won't survive a nuclear war, and so does Russia. We may eliminate our enemies, but we will die in the process. Everyone understands it. So until someone goes mad, there probably won't be a nuclear war. But in my view, today's active intercivilizational struggle is a sign of a growing level of insanity. I hope it stops. There are very few people who are prepared to have all human life wiped out for their cause. And most of them aren't in a position to start a nuclear war. That's important. It's clear to me that Putin won't start bombing America just because he's upset with Americans. But if there's a risk of our civilization dying, that's different. We have to learn not to kill our adversaries as we struggle and compete. In 1990, I was 28, I was no boy.
In today's world, a 28-year-old is a boy. Back then, no.
In those days, I was a grown man. The defeat of our civilization was based on the idea that the US offered us friendship, equal partners, friends who love and respect each other. The history of our intercivilizational relations allowed for that. But that's not how it turned out, which is why you have this great disappointment. We no longer believe that we can be friends with the West.
Why? What were the actions that caused this in your view?
As if, firstly, here's the most primitive example. Russia said, okay guys, we're now brothers and friends. Accept us into NATO. Let's join forces. We were told, no, NATO is there to oppose you. Well, if that's the case, then you're no friends of ours. Lots of things like that. There were minor good things too. Those chicken leg.
Bush's legs?
Bush's legs. Those were acts of kindness, but there were also acts of malice. My understanding is that the only thing Yeltsin didn't concede to the US, even though America tried to have Russia hand over its nuclear weapons, that's the only thing Yeltsin didn't agree to. And if he had, our civilization wouldn't exist today. That's how it is. I think what we need is to understand that we're different. We're neighbors. Why should we be at war all the time? What we have is enough, but it's very idealistic.
You said yourself that's not possible.
It's very idealistic, but we could all calm down a bit and be less ambitious. Seriously, why does the West need Ukraine?
You said yourself that civilizations try to expand.
No, but objectively, why? There is no reason. I don't think we need to be biting pieces of China. We don't need to conquer France either.
Well, you're not in charge of a country and neither am I. That's probably why we see things that way. It seems that the people who come to power in great countries
Are more aggressive, yes.
more ambitious, more status conscious, both personally and at the national level, more concerned with state power, expansion, growth, and their place in history.
The thing that concerns me the most is that the Vaishya caste is in charge. We'll come to that. That's why some people want to be richer than others. Every civilization understands we could have a nuclear war, but still tries to be richer than others at any price. That's a problem. We don't need to be richer. We should try to equalize the economic situation at a global level, so there's no rich world and poor world. And that's extremely difficult in the current world because people say, what? I have to not be richer than these other people? Why? And being richer means robbing people.
I think most people see it differently. It's like we're all playing a game. I want to play to the best of my ability and you to the best of yours. And then we see who gets what. It's not my fault you're bad at tennis. Me playing tennis better than you doesn't mean I robbed you, does it?
If you made me play, yes.
That was your choice. You could have chosen not to play.
Yes, I played chess. You played tennis and your ball knocked my pieces over.
This is a strange metaphor. Anyway, let's come back to before. From a historical perspective, your civilizational view is useful in this situation, but historians also have the great man theory. And great doesn't necessarily mean morally good. It refers to their impact on history. For example, Napoleon and Hitler were driven not just by civilizational interests, but by their own psychology. They were two men who wanted...
You understand they were monarchs, right?
Yes.
So was Stalin. Some were good, some were very weak. In Russia, for example, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Nicholas II, Alexander III were strong. Stalin was strong. He wasn't kind and gentle, he was just strong. The modern so-called democratic system is designed to elevate a weak people to power. This is good if someone strong is behind them. For example, Yeltsin was weak, very weak. What did this lead to? The disaster of the 1990s.
That's what I'm talking about. If great civilizations identify strong people, those strong people come to power, and strong people want to defend, conquer, expand, enrich.
You know, the majority of strong people don't necessarily think about conquering. Hitler wanted to make Germany richer and more successful. To do that, he needed to conquer a lot of places to make the people there poorer and less happy in order to make his people richer and happier. That's the critical mistake. There is that Chinese saying, that strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. It seems to be how it is. I think it's some kind of pattern.
Yes, well, let's get back to...
Yeltsin was followed by a strong man. I fear his replacement will be weak again.
We'll come back to that. That's interesting. But let's finish what we started. Hitler didn't just want to make Germany better and wealthier. Like Napoleon, he had certain personal psychological qualities.
No, I say I'm a genius, I'm a great man, I'm the best. The many people, including people who aren't like Hitler or Napoleon, think like that.
Yes, but we're talking about something else. Napoleon caused the deaths of huge numbers of people because of his personal ambitions, not civilizational ones.
So did Hitler.
We all know what Hitler did. He plunged all of Europe and the entire world into a bloodbath. Yes, he had civilizational and national ideas.
He imagined Germany was the center of Western civilization, even though he was wrong.
Yes, and also he was a psychopath who wanted to use Germany to achieve his personal interests.
I don't know. My sense is that he had German ambitions, not personal ones. His personal ambition was, I'm the top dog, you must all do what I say, and most people accepted it.
That's what I'm talking about. People driven by the idea that everyone must obey them are likely to involve our countries and civilizations in conflicts which may not have happened or may not have been as fierce or terrible. So when we're talking about a nuclear world, how do you see the impact of such people?
I can tell you that neither Hitler nor Napoleon expected certain death. That is what happened to Hitler, but Napoleon was treated more humanely, but that's what happened to him as well. But they didn't expect it.
That's what I'm talking about.
But today's situation means it's impossible to not expect certain death. Do you think the US president today understands he'll be one of the first ones killed if there's a nuclear war?
Of course, but let's look at Hitler objectively. Historians differ, but I think the Battle of Moscow is the beginning of the end for Germany. It was clear at that point Germany couldn't win. Maybe it was later, maybe it's other battles on the Eastern Front, maybe it's D-Day. At that point, it was extremely clear they had no chance. Nonetheless, Hitler continued even though it was clear. If we're talking about thinking logically, he must have known there was no chance of victory.
He wasn't certain. He was confident he could reach an agreement.
Hold on.
He thought he could reach an agreement with Western countries to leave him alone, and then he would win against the USSR.
By the time the Americans landed in Normandy, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. There was no chance of a deal with the Allies. And yet, even after that, he continued the fight.
What else could he have done?
Hold on, let me finish. He continued the fight and allowed both the Soviet Union and the Western Allies to wipe Germany off the face of the earth. That's what happened.
That was a sign of a kind of madness, because he said that if my people surrender, let them all die. It's the Varangian idea.
Fine, but that's what I'm talking about. You say, in the modern world, everyone knows they'll die. And I'm saying there was a guy whose personal psychology meant that in a situation where, in my opinion, it was much more obvious that he and his country would be destroyed, he continued the bloodbath.
His country wasn't destroyed. His country suffered greatly, lost.
Millions dead.
The Germans lost less than half the people the USSR did.
But that's irrelevant. He didn't consider Soviet people to be people at all. We're talking about the fact that he knew he would be killed and his country would suffer. He continued the fight nonetheless. So we can imagine a person in today's world so possessed by madness that he'd act in this way, even if he knows that in the nuclear world?
This leads us to Lev Gumilev.
Okay, I'm all ears.
His idea regarding ethnic groups is closely linked to aggression and the willingness to fight anyone over principles or anything else. If the center of one of the civilizations is not an umbrella ethnic group, but an ordinary ethnic group, then likely at some point that ethnic group will go through a peak.
Describe the idea for people who don't know it.
The idea is simple. Every ethnic group starts its history, which lasts approximately 1,500 years. There's a rapid increase in the number of people who are prepared to fight for whatever at any cost. Then there's an intense conflict that can last a couple of centuries, sometimes 3 or 4 centuries. Then the aggression slowly dies down and eventually reaches close to zero, at which point that ethnic group's history ends. The most interesting thing is what happens after that. Either the group disappears, or it's absorbed into a neighboring umbrella ethnic group where it is reborn and begins its new history.
Can you give an example to make it clearer for people?
Well, you always ask about Europe.
Well, Europe is most relevant for our audience.
I understand, but let me tell you specifically about Armenia and the history of the Armenian people.
Armenia won't be familiar to people. Can we use a different example?
I don't have a better example. Armenia is the perfect example of Lev Gumilev's theory. 1,500 years ago, the Armenians left the Persian civilization and moved to the Byzantine civilization, where it was reborn. Today's Armenians are the descendants of those who joined Byzantium. Today, the Armenian ethnic group is in the final stage of its history and has been for 100 years. And part of the Armenian ethnic group has started moving to a different umbrella ethnic group, the Russian or Soviet one, and it's the descendants of those people who are the real Armenians now. They are part of the Armenian ethnic group. And it seems that those who are now part of this other umbrella ethnic group, their descendants will be the new Armenian ethnic group over the next 1,500 years. And before that, the move to Byzantium was not the first move in the history of the Armenian ethnic group.
How is this connected to the Hitlers and Napoleons?
The emergence of Hitlers and Napoleons usually suggests those ethnic groups have reached the peak of their aggression. That's when you get domestic bloodbaths as well as foreign wars. The French ethnic group started shortly before Napoleon. Before that, it was a number of ethnic groups under the French monarchy. The French ethnic group was formed after that, and with Napoleon it hit its peak, the revolution, and Napoleon are that peak. A lot of time has passed since, and they're a lot less aggressive now. That's why today it's not the French attacking immigrants, but immigrants attacking the French.
Which civilizations or ethnic groups are currently at their aggressive peak?
Today?
Of the ones that matter.
I'm trying to think if there's a significant young ethnic group today. Oh yes, Koreans, without a doubt.
Koreans?
Of course. North Koreans are a clear example of peak aggression. That's why, for around 100 years, you have what you have there. You have to understand these processes happen on a historical timescale. A year or even a decade is not a significant period of time. Like I said, Armenians started moving to a new umbrella ethnic group over 100 years ago, and it's still ongoing. The lifetime of one person is an insignificant period of time for historical processes. That is one example of an ethnic group at the peak of aggression. So yes, North Koreans, because they began forming anew as an ethnic group recently, I think after some time, North Koreans and South Koreans will think they're different ethnic groups. Today, North Koreans are quite aggressive. After the formation of Pakistan, it was quite a while ago.
It was 1947.
Yes. There was also an intensification there. Prior to that, it was a fairly peaceful group. But as soon as a new ethnic identity was formed, you got the aggression.
Based on this theory, or on combining this theory with what we've already discussed, what events do you see coming for the world?
I just want to say Why it's not super important? Because in reality, no civilization is ever led by an ethnic group. It's always an umbrella ethnic group. And umbrella groups don't have these high levels of aggression. The Turks are an example. When they stopped being Ottomans and became Turks, they became very aggressive and started a domestic bloodbath.
Whereas before it was an imperial civilization.
The Ottomans included everyone who lived in that area: Greeks, Armenians, Turkic people, and even Europeans who moved there could become Ottomans. A Spanish Ottoman, an Italian Ottoman, etc. This was normal. They even had major military leaders like that.
As an outside observer, how do you see Western civilization at the moment?
What do you mean? I see it.
What trends do you see?
I told you. One trend I see coming is that in the next 100 years, there will be a gradual splitting into the Northwest and the Southwest. I also see there is a gradual decline in the umbrella ethnicity. And that means there could be very significant internal restructuring. I am very hopeful that in our civilization, that umbrella ethnicity won't die because of nationalism. You must understand the racial conflict in the US is that in the past, white people mistreated black people. Now the situation is reversed. Not all black people mistreat white people, just like not all white people mistreated black people, but the race as a whole feels it has a right to do that. That's a problem. And it's the problem that can undermine the umbrella ethnicity and the center of Western civilization, which is the US. That's what could encourage the split. I'm not making any promises, but it could happen.
Are other civilizations trying to encourage this process?
All civilizations are in conflict with the others and do what they can to undermine them. It's normal. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese encourage it, and more actively than Indians, because the Chinese have more of a conflict with Western civilization. Whereas in terms of the Arab and Persian civilizations, the Indians are likely to do more harm to them because they have a bigger conflict there. It's normal. There's nothing to be done about it. These are the emanations we talked about before. In our civilization, we are currently reducing the number of liberals, i.e., people who are the product of Western emanations, by creating the conditions for them to emigrate. If you prefer Western values, go live in the West, and vice versa. If some people in the West prefer our values, they're welcome here. Move here and join our civilization.
How can a civilization protect itself against the falling apart of the umbrella ethnic group in the way you described in America?
I don't know about America. I fear another country might try to become the umbrella ethnic group, and I suspect I know which one. Brazil. It could try to become the umbrella ethnic group, but it will likely become the umbrella ethnic group for the Southwest rather than the entire West. That could happen. I want to believe the existence of terrifying nuclear weapons that could end all life on Earth, not just human life, might lead us to gradually changing the rules of the game and start treating each other, if not with love, then with understanding and respect. I know that in the 1990s, representatives of the United States did not treat us with understanding and respect. And that's why we hold a big grudge against them. And I think that for 2 to 3 more generations, we won't trust them. Even if they become extremely honest, we still won't trust them for another 70 years. After that, we'll see.
How do you think all of this will be affected by AI?
Not at all. I think the subject of AI is somewhat exaggerated.
Why is that?
I personally think AI will never reach human intelligence levels. That's more a product of my mystical views about the human soul.
Well, your mystical views and how they tie into everything we've already discussed will be the subject of our third and final interview.
I don't believe AI will become the foundation of the world. It's a tool, yet another tool. You know, the greatest invention in terms of its impact on the lives of human beings? The toilet. The toilet changed the quality of life for people more than anything else. You think AI will change our lives to that extent?
It's possible.
I think it won't.
It seems you really like toilets.
It's true. I wouldn't want to live without one. As for AI, it's yet another tool at our disposal. Will it be as impactful as the toilet? I'm not sure. Of course it's possible, but I'm not sure.
In the final part, we talk about his model for understanding the world through different groups in society and how their attitudes and approaches are determined by the type of roles that they play. We also talk about mysticism. We talk about God, the existence of scientific explanations or lack thereof for certain important things, and more.